A bee climbs over the yellow face of a dandelion, dusting its legs in pollen while the lawn around it sits short, green, and ordinary. A hand reaches into the grass nearby, fingers closing around another dandelion stem at the base. The flower bends. The taproot holds. For a second, it looks like the most familiar spring chore in the world. Clean up the yard, pull the weeds, make the lawn look healthy again. But just a few inches away, another bee lands. It pushes between the tiny florets of the dandelion, searching for nectar. In the white clover beside it, a second bee lowers its head into a cluster of small blooms. The scene has not changed, but what it means has. This is not just a messy patch of lawn. For an insect trying to refuel after winter, it may be breakfast. Dandelions and clover are often treated like signs of neglect. They interrupt the smooth green carpet people are taught to want. They spread where they are not invited. They bloom low in the grass, right where mowing, spraying, and pulling can erase them in an afternoon. So the usual reaction is simple: get rid of them. But in early spring, especially in neighborhoods where most yards are only grass, these flowers can be part of a much larger story. They can offer nectar for energy and pollen for protein at a time when many other plants are not yet blooming, or when the nearest better flower may be farther away than a small bee can easily travel. That does not mean every dandelion is sacred. It does not mean clover alone can save bees. And it does not mean a lawn full of these flowers is the same as a rich meadow of native plants. The point is more specific and more important. A plant becomes valuable when it blooms at the right time, in the right place, in a landscape where few other meals are available. That is why the word weed can be misleading. A weed is often just a plant growing where people do not want it. But bees do not read lawns that way. They read the landscape as a map of food, distance, timing, shelter, and risk. To a person, a dandelion in the grass may look like a flaw. To a hungry pollinator, it may be one of the only open flowers in reach. And that difference matters, because bees are not moving through an untouched world. They are moving through streets, driveways, fences, turf grass, mulch beds, trimmed hedges, and yards where flowering plants are often removed before they can be used. One yard may not seem important. One flower may seem too small to matter. But when every yard in a neighborhood is managed the same way, the small removals start to connect. A lawn can quietly become either a blank space in the food map or a small survival patch in a season when food is scarce. So before that dandelion is pulled, before the clover is sprayed, it is worth looking closer. The question is not just, is this a weed? The question is, who is eating here? Dandelions open in the weak warmth of spring, and bees begin finding them before many gardens look awake. The familiar lawn dandelion is usually Pteroxacum officinale, and each yellowhead is not one flower, but a cluster of many tiny florets offering nectar and pollen. For early bumblebee queens, mining bees, mason bees, and honeybee workers flying on warm days, that matters. A queen bumblebee emerging from winter does not have the luxury of waiting for a perfect garden. She needs energy quickly. She has to feed herself, search for a nest site, and begin the work of building a colony from almost nothing. A dandelion is not a complete solution. Its nutrition varies, and it cannot replace the diversity of native spring blooms. But when the surrounding landscape is trimmed grass, pavement, and shrubs not yet in flower, useful and imperfect can still be the difference between finding food and finding nothing. Nearby, the clover changes the lawn in a quieter way. White clover, Trifolium repens, sits low among the grass and opens small white flower clusters that bees visit again and again. Honeybees work it. Bumblebees work it. Some solitary bees use it too. It also belongs to the legume family, able to fix nitrogen with the help of bacteria around its roots, which is one reason clover was once considered a normal, even helpful, part of lawns. Then, broadleaf herbicides helped rewrite the standard. A clean lawn became a grass-only lawn. Clover, once blended into turf seed mixes, was rebranded as a problem because the chemicals that killed dandelions killed clover too. The weed label was not handed down by nature. It was shaped by fashion, marketing, and the idea that a yard should look uniform even if that uniformity leaves almost nothing blooming. From above, one grass lawn looks harmless. Across a neighborhood, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Turfgrass covers tens of millions of acres in the United States, with estimates often around 40 million acres. A single yard without flowers is one empty patch. A street of them becomes a corridor of scarcity. Most bees need nectar for energy and pollen to feed their young. Most bees are not honeybees living in managed hives. They are solitary species, often nesting alone in soil, stems, or small cavities, and many do not travel miles in search of food. Some forage within only hundreds of meters. To a small bee with a limited range, perfect lawns can become large gaps between meals. And not every bee is helped in the same way. There are roughly 20,000 bee species worldwide, and about 4,000 native species in North America. Some are generalists, able to visit many kinds of flowers. Others are specialists, tied closely to particular native plants. Clover may feed many common pollinators, but it will not meet the needs of every vulnerable bee. Dandelions may help during a lean window, but they are not a magic replacement for habitat. That is the deeper issue. Bees do not need one lucky bloom. They need a calendar. Early flowers for emerging queens and spring solitary bees. Mid-season flowers as colonies grow and more insects are active. Late-season flowers to help bumblebee colonies produce new queens and males before the year turns cold again. So the damage is not only a hand pulling a few plants, it is the habit of preventing blooms everywhere, all the time. Broadleaf herbicides remove dandelions and clover while leaving grass. Insecticides can expose bees through direct contact, contaminated pollen, or nectar. Mowing during peak bloom can erase a food source in minutes. But the answer does not have to be abandoning the yard. Let clover bloom in one section. Mow less often, or mow in rotation so some flowers remain. Avoid spraying flowering plants. Add native flowers for early, middle, and late season. Leave a little bare soil, a few hollow stems, or some leaf litter where nesting bees can use them. A bee-friendly lawn is not necessarily wild-looking. It is simply less empty. A mower pauses at the edge of a blooming patch, and the dandelions tremble in the moving air without being cut. For once, the lawn is not treated as a surface that must be made perfect immediately. It is allowed to be a place where something is happening. A bee drops into the clover, disappears for a moment between the white florets, then lifts off and crosses a few inches of grass to another bloom. Nothing about the movement looks dramatic. It is small, practical, and easy to miss. But this is what survival often looks like at insect scale. One short flight, one flower, one sip of nectar, one load of pollen carried back toward a nest hidden somewhere most people will never notice. At the beginning, these flowers looked like a problem. Yellow dots in the grass, white patches breaking up the green, signs that the yard needed attention. But the same lawn can be read another way. It can be a feeding station in a neighborhood where many other feeding stations have been removed. It can be a brief spring resource before gardens fill in. It can be a low-growing bloom that survives inside a space people already mow, walk across, and manage. That does not make every weed equally valuable. It does not mean a yard should ignore invasive plants, local rules, or the need for usable space. It does not mean dandelions and clover are better than diverse native flowers. The larger lesson is more careful than that. A plant's value depends on its timing, its place, and what else surrounds it. A dandelion growing beside a meadow full of native spring flowers may be only one option among many. A dandelion growing in a block of close-cut lawns may be one of the few open meals available. Clover in a lawn is not a complete habitat, but it can turn a sterile patch of turf into a place where bees can forage. These flowers matter most when the landscape has been simplified around them. So the real choice is not between a perfect lawn and total neglect. The choice is between seeing the yard as decoration only or seeing it as part of a living map. Bees cross that map without knowing property lines. They do not know which flowers are fashionable. They do not know which plants people have decided belong. They move by scent, color, warmth, distance, and need. And when every yard removes every bloom, the map empties out. One pulled dandelion is not a catastrophe. One mowed patch of clover is not the end of pollinator conservation. But repeated across whole neighborhoods, the habit of eliminating flowers before they can feed anything creates a quiet kind of hunger. It is not as obvious as a forest being cut down or a wetland being filled. It looks clean. It looks normal. It looks like a well-kept lawn. That is why the pause matters. Before spraying a patch of clover, notice whether bees are already working it. Before mowing every section at once, consider leaving one strip blooming for another week. Before pulling every dandelion in early spring, ask what else is flowering nearby. If the answer is almost nothing, then that ordinary yellow flower may be doing more than it appears. The better yard is not defined by weeds or no weeds. It is defined by continuity. Something blooming early, something blooming in summer, something blooming late. Fewer chemicals on flowers. A little room for nesting. More native plants where they can fit. Clover allowed in one corner. Dandelions tolerated during the lean weeks. A lawn that still works for people, but no longer offers bees only grass. The bee rises from the clover and lands on a dandelion, its legs dusted gold. The flower is still just a dandelion. The clover is still just clover. The yard is still a yard. But now the scene is harder to dismiss. What looked like neglect may be nourishment. What looked like a weed may be a meal. And what looked like an ordinary lawn may be one small piece of the route a bee has to survive. The next time yellow or white flowers appear in the grass, the first response does not have to be pulling, spraying, or cutting. It can simply be looking closer. Because sometimes the most important change in a landscape begins before anything is planted. It begins with noticing who is already eating there.